Ma'am, step away from the pump right now. The voice cut through the quiet hum of the gas station like a blade, sharp, public, impossible to ignore, and in that instant, every head within 50 feet turned as Naomi Carter slowly lifted her gaze from the nozzle in her hand. The faint smell of gasoline mixing with the dry afternoon air, her reflection trembling in the chrome surface of the pump, red and blue lights already beginning to wash across the concrete in slow, pulsing waves, painting everything in alternating shadows as if the scene had been decided long before she arrived. She didn't move right away, not out of defiance, but out of awareness, the kind that settles deep in your chest when you realize the moment is no longer yours to control. And across from her, the officer stood rigid, one hand resting near his belt, the other gesturing with practiced authority, his eyes scanning not just her, but what she represented to him, something out of place, something that needed to be corrected, contained, understood within. His version of order. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the handle before she released it with care, the soft click echoing louder than it should have, and for a brief second, everything seemed to hold its breath, even the wind that had been drifting lazily across the open lot now stilled, as if the world itself was waiting to see which way this would turn. A pickup truck idled near the far pump, its engine low and steady, while a teenager leaned against the vending machine, his soda halfway raised, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene with the kind of quiet tension that spreads faster than sound. "Is there a problem, officer?" Naomi asked, her voice calm, measured, not raised, not trembling, just present, and that alone seemed to shift something, subtle but real, because calm in a moment like this doesn't defuse tension, it exposes it. The officer took a step closer, boots firm against the pavement, the faint crunch of gravel underfoot punctuating each movement. "I said step away from the vehicle," he repeated, slower this time, as if clarity would come through repetition, as if authority needed to be heard twice to be believed, and Naomi complied. One step back, then another, her posture straight, her hands visible, her breathing steady, each inhale slow, controlled, like she was anchoring herself to something deeper than the scene unfolding in front of her. A second patrol car pulled in, tires rolling over the painted lines, stopping at an angle that boxed her in without ever touching her space. And suddenly the open gas station felt smaller, tighter, like the air had thickened, like every inch of ground now belonged to someone else. The officer's radio crackled faintly, voices layered and distant, but his attention never left her, and Naomi could feel it, not just as observation, but as judgment already forming, already concluding, and still, she didn't argue, didn't rush, didn't reach for anything that might be misunderstood. Instead, she simply met his gaze, steady and unflinching, and said quietly, almost like a warning carried on breath alone, "You're making a mistake." The words did not land the way most warnings do. There was no edge, no rise in volume, just a quiet certainty that lingered in the air longer than it should have. And for a brief second, the officer hesitated, not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but Naomi saw it, that flicker of doubt that passed through his eyes before discipline covered it again. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," he said, his tone tightening now, more controlled, more deliberate, as if he needed the structure of procedure to anchor whatever uncertainty had just surfaced. And Naomi slowly lifted her hands, palms open, fingers relaxed, the sunlight catching faint lines across her skin, steady, unthreatening, her posture unchanged, grounded, while somewhere behind her, a car door shut with a dull thud, and another set of footsteps joined the scene, heavier this time, more authoritative, the kind that carried expectation rather than curiosity. The second officer moved into position without a word, standing slightly behind and to the side, creating a silent frame around her, a formation that felt rehearsed, familiar, and Naomi exhaled once through her nose, controlled, measured, as if she had stepped into a pattern she already understood. The teenager by the vending machine shifted his weight, glancing between them, his drink forgotten now, condensation slipping down the side of the cup and dripping onto the concrete in slow, uneven drops, each one marking time in a way no one acknowledged, but everyone felt. "Can you tell me why I am being stopped?" Naomi asked, her voice the same as before, calm, Clear, not confrontational, but the question itself seemed to ripple through the moment, because it demanded something simple, something factual, and the officer's jaw tightened just slightly before he responded. "We received a report about this vehicle," he said, gesturing briefly toward her car without fully turning his body away from her. "So we are going to sort this out." And there it was, vague, incomplete, enough to justify action but not enough to explain it. And Naomi nodded once, slow, acknowledging the words without agreeing to them, her eyes drifting for just a second toward her phone lying a few feet away on the ground, the screen still lit, the call that had not gone through frozen mid-attempt. A faint breeze returned, brushing against her jacket, lifting a loose strand of hair before letting it fall again. And in that small movement, the tension seemed to stretch thinner, quieter, like a wire pulled too tight, while the officer reached for his radio, pressing the button with a firm, practiced motion, his voice dropping into a coded rhythm, numbers and confirmations exchanged in clipped tones that meant nothing to the bystanders, but everything to him. And Naomi listened, not to the words, but to the pauses between them, to the subtle shift in his cadence as he waited for a response that took just a fraction longer than expected. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded, heavy with something unspoken, and Naomi's gaze returned to him, steady, unwavering, as she said softly, almost as if she were reminding him rather than warning him, "It is not too late to slow this down." The air shifted again, not with movement this time, but with attention, the kind that gathers quietly before something changes, and Officer Reeves felt it even if he could not name it, a subtle pressure behind his ribs as the radio remained silent longer than it should have, his thumb still resting against the button as if pressing it again might force an answer to arrive faster, more certain, more aligned with the situation he believed he was controlling. "Dispatch will confirm in a moment," he said, more to reinforce the moment than to inform her, his voice steady but carrying a trace of impatience that had not been there before, and Naomi watched him without interruption, her expression unchanged, her breathing slow and even, the kind of stillness that does not come from compliance but from clarity, as if she was standing inside a different version of this moment entirely, one that had already moved beyond what he could see. A distant engine rolled across the highway beyond the gas station, low and constant, blending into the background hum. But it was different from the idle sounds around them, deeper, more deliberate, and Naomi's eyes shifted for just a fraction of a second toward the road before returning to him, not enough to draw attention, just enough to mark awareness. The second officer adjusted his stance, glancing briefly toward Reeves, waiting for direction that had not yet come, the structure of the moment beginning to loosen at its edges as uncertainty crept in where certainty had been expected, and the teenager near the vending machine lowered his drink completely now, his gaze fixed, unblinking, sensing something he could not yet understand but knew was building. "Ma'am, I am going to need identification," Reeves continued, stepping forward half a pace, not aggressive, not retreating, just enough to reassert position, and Naomi tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in quiet acknowledgement, her hands still visible, still open, as she spoke with the same calm tone that had not wavered since the beginning. "My identification is in the vehicle, but I would advise you to wait." And there it was again, not resistance, not refusal, just guidance offered in a way that did not challenge his authority, but did not submit to it either, and that balance unsettled him more than outright defiance ever could. The radio crackled suddenly, a burst of static cutting through the tension, and Reeves lifted it quickly, expecting routine confirmation. But the voice that came through was different, sharper, more urgent. The cadence clipped in a way that pulled his full attention instantly, and though the words were low, partially obscured by interference, the change in tone was unmistakable, enough to make his posture stiffen, his shoulders tightening as he listened. Really listened this time. Naomi did not move, but something in her presence shifted, almost imperceptible, like a line had been crossed somewhere unseen, and the wind picked up again, stronger now, sweeping across the lot and rattling a loose sign near the edge of the station, the metallic clatter echoing briefly before fading, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Reeves lowered the radio slowly, his grip still firm but no longer rigid. his eyes returning to Naomi with something new beneath the surface. Not yet understanding, not yet acceptance, but the first crack in certainty. And Naomi met that look without triumph, without urgency, just the same steady calm, as if she had been waiting not for the moment to change, but for him to finally hear it. The change did not arrive with noise, it arrived with absence, the kind of silence that replaces certainty without asking permission, and Officer Reeves felt it settle into his chest as the words from the radio replayed in his mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise enough to disrupt everything he thought he understood about the moment. And for the first time since stepping out of his vehicle, he did not speak immediately. The second officer shifted again, glancing at him with a question he did not voice, waiting for direction that no longer came as easily, while the teenager by the vending machine took a slow step back, instinctively creating space, as if something larger than the scene itself had begun to unfold. Naomi remained where she was, hands still visible, posture unchanged, but there was a quiet shift in her presence now, not in movement, but in weight, as if the ground beneath her had steadied while everything else began to tilt. A low rumble echoed from the road. Beyond the gas station, deeper now, closer, the kind of sound that did not belong to passing traffic, and Reeves turned his head slightly, just enough to catch the movement in his peripheral vision. Dark vehicles approaching with a controlled speed, not rushing, not hesitant, just certain, their motion cutting cleanly through the open stretch of highway before turning into the station without hesitation. The tires rolled over the pavement with a soft, deliberate sound, stopping in a formation that felt intentional, practiced, and the doors opened almost in unison, figures stepping out with a composure that did not need to announce authority because it carried it naturally, their presence shifting the atmosphere instantly, not through force, but through clarity. Reeves straightened, his stance adjusting automatically, years of training responding before his thoughts could catch up. But this time the structure he relied on did not align with what was happening in front of him, and that disconnect settled in quietly, deeply. One of the arriving agents stepped forward, his gaze moving first to Naomi, then to the officers, assessing without haste, without emotion, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled, even, but carried a weight that did not invite interruption. "Release her," he said, not as a suggestion, not as a request, but as a fact that had already been decided. The words did not echo. They did not need to. They simply landed, and for a brief moment, no one moved, the space between instruction and action stretching thin, fragile, until Reeves finally exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding, his grip loosening slightly as the reality of the situation began to settle in layers he could not yet fully process. Naomi lowered her hand slowly, not in relief, not in triumph, just in acknowledgement, her eyes steady, calm, as if none of this had surprised her, as if she had simply waited for the moment to arrive exactly as it was meant to. The wind moved again, softer this time, carrying the faint scent of asphalt and heat, and in that quiet shift, the balance of the scene had changed completely, not with chaos, not with conflict, but with a single realization beginning to take hold, silent and irreversible. The metal clicked softly as the tension left the cuffs, a small sound that carried far more weight than it should have, and for a moment, no one spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because the shift had already happened and words would only trail behind it. Officer Reeves stepped back half a pace, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if every action required thought instead of instinct. His eyes no longer fixed with certainty, but searching, recalibrating, trying to reconcile the scene he had constructed with the one unfolding in front of him. The agent who had spoken did not raise his voice again, did not repeat himself. He simply watched, his presence steady, composed, the kind of authority that did not escalate because it did not need to. And Naomi rolled her wrists slightly, not in discomfort, just to restore motion, her posture remaining straight, her gaze calm, meeting no one and everyone at the same time, as if she existed just outside the tension that still lingered in the air. The second officer lowered his hands to his sides, his stance loosening, uncertainty replacing the rigid formation he had held moments earlier, while the teenager near the vending machine exhaled audibly, a breath he had been holding without realizing. his shoulders dropping as the scene began to settle into something quieter, something more complex than it had appeared at first. Reeves cleared his throat, the sound subtle but noticeable in the stillness, and for the first time, he looked directly at Naomi without the filter of assumption, his voice quieter now, stripped of the edge it carried before. "Ma'am, I need to understand what is going on," he said, not as a command, but as an admission, and Naomi regarded him for a brief moment, her expression unchanged, neither cold nor forgiving, simply present, as if she was measuring not his words, but the space behind them. "What is going on," she replied softly, "is that you acted before you had the full picture." And the words did not accuse, they did not rise, they simply landed, clear and undeniable, and Reeves felt them settle in a place he could not ignore, not because of who had arrived, but because of what he now recognized in his own actions. The agent stepped closer, his tone still even, but carrying a precision that cut through any remaining ambiguity. "You received incomplete information and escalated without verification," he said, not looking at Naomi now, but at Reeves. "That ends here." And the finality in those words was not loud, not forceful, but absolute. And Reeves nodded once, slowly, the motion small but significant, as if he was acknowledging not just the situation, but the weight of it. Naomi turned slightly then, her eyes drifting toward the road where the dark vehicles had arrived, the sunlight reflecting faintly off their surfaces, and in that quiet glance, there was no satisfaction, no triumph, only a calm awareness that the moment had unfolded exactly as it needed to. While behind her, the gas pump clicked again, resetting itself, the ordinary sound returning to a place that had, only minutes ago, felt anything but ordinary. And in that return, the silence deepened, not empty, but full of something unspoken that would not leave easily. The movement slowed, not because anyone asked it to, but because something in the air no longer demanded urgency, and Naomi stood there in the quiet aftermath, her hands now resting naturally at her sides, her shoulders relaxed but not softened, as if she carried a stillness that did not depend on the situation around her. The sun dipped slightly lower, casting longer shadows across the gas station pavement, stretching the shapes of the vehicles and the figures standing between them into something quieter, more reflective, and for the first time since the moment began, the space felt open again, like it could breathe. Officer Reeves shifted his weight, the gravel beneath his boot making a faint, uneven sound, and he glanced briefly toward the agent before looking back at Naomi, his expression no longer guarded by certainty, but marked by something heavier, something that settled deeper than embarrassment or confusion, something closer to recognition. Naomi turned her head, slightly, her gaze moving across the scene not to assess it, but to release it, her eyes passing over the second officer, the teenager, the vehicles, each detail acknowledged without attachment, and then returning to Reeves, steady and calm, as if this moment was not about what had happened, but about what would be understood from it. A soft gust of wind moved through again, carrying the distant scent of heated asphalt and faint traces of gasoline, brushing lightly against her jacket, lifting it just enough to remind her of the present, and she inhaled slowly, her breath measured, grounding, before speaking again, her voice low but clear. "There is a difference between authority and assumption," and the words did not accuse, they did not rise above the moment. They simply existed within it, quiet and undeniable, settling into the space between them like something that had always been there waiting to be seen. Reeves did not respond immediately, his gaze dropping for a fraction of a second before returning to her, the pause longer this time, not because he lacked words, but because the ones he had no longer fit, and in that silence, the agent stepped back slightly, not withdrawing, but allowing the moment to belong to them, his presence still firm but no longer central. The teenager exhaled again, softer now, almost unnoticed, his attention still fixed, but no longer tense, as if he was witnessing something he would not fully understand until much later. Naomi's eyes softened just slightly, not with sympathy, not with approval, but with a quiet acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place, and she turned her body toward her car, not abruptly, not as an escape, but as a continuation, each step measured, steady, her shoes pressing lightly against the pavement, the sound grounding, real. Behind her, the world did not rush back in. It returned slowly, the hum of distant traffic, the faint click of the pump resetting again, the low murmur of voices beginning to reemerge, but none of it erased what had just occurred. It only layered over it, leaving the core intact. And as Naomi reached her car door, her hand resting briefly against the handle, she paused, not to look back, but to breathe once more, deeply, as if sealing the moment in place before moving forward, leaving behind not noise, not conflict, but something far quieter, far more lasting. Her hand remained on the car door, still, grounded, as if the moment had not quite finished with her yet, and behind her, the quiet did not break. It deepened, stretching across the gas station like a held breath that no one wanted to disturb. The agent who had first spoken stepped forward again, but slower this time, his presence no longer corrective, but clarifying, and his eyes moved briefly to Naomi before returning to Officer Reeves, measuring not the situation anymore, but the understanding within it. For the record, he said, his voice even, precise. You were about to process a detainment without confirmed verification on a federally cleared individual. And the words settled heavily, not loud, not dramatic, but carrying a weight that reached beyond the moment itself, and Reeves felt it, not as pressure from authority, but as the undeniable structure of truth aligning around him. Naomi did not turn, but her posture shifted slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that what had remained unspoken was now being placed into the open, and the agent continued, not with escalation, but with clarity. Ms. Carter holds active advisory clearance tied to federal operations, he said, each word deliberate, which means your assumption did not just affect a civilian interaction, it intersected with national protocols. And there it was, not just identity, not just status, but context, a layer that reframed everything that had happened in a way Reeves could not ignore. Not because of rank, but because of consequence. The second officer straightened instinctively, his stance adjusting again, but this time not out of enforcement, but awareness, his gaze flickering between Reeves and the agent as the reality of the situation settled into place. The teenager near the vending machine blinked, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to awe, not fully understanding the details, but sensing the scale of what had just been revealed. Reeves swallowed. Once, the motion small but visible, his shoulders lowering slightly as the last fragments of certainty gave way, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the firmness from before, only a quiet attempt to reconcile. I did not have that information, he said, not as an excuse, but as a realization spoken out loud. The agent nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the statement itself. That is exactly the point, he replied, his tone unchanged. You acted before you had it. And the words did not strike, they settled, final, immovable. Naomi finally turned her head slightly, just enough for her profile to catch the light. Her expression still calm, unchanged, and for a brief moment, her eyes met Reeves again, not with judgment, not with triumph, but with something quieter, something that asked nothing and offered nothing beyond the truth of what had just unfolded. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the faint rustle of a loose receipt skittering across the pavement before catching against the edge of the curb. And in that small, ordinary motion, the weight of the moment anchored itself fully, no longer building, no longer shifting, just present, undeniable, and complete. The silence did not break with apology. It lingered, stretching between them like something that needed to be understood before it could be released, and Officer Reeves stood there, no longer anchored by procedure, no longer shielded by assumption, just present in the weight of what had unfolded, his gaze fixed on Naomi not with authority, but with a kind of quiet reckoning that settled deeper with each passing second. The agent stepped back another half pace, his role now complete, allowing the moment to belong fully to those who had created it, and the space that opened felt different, no longer controlled, no longer reactive, but reflective, as if the entire scene had shifted from action into meaning. Naomi's hand rested lightly against the car door, her fingers relaxed, not gripping, not tense, and she turned fully this time, her movement smooth, unhurried, her eyes meeting Reeves again with the same steady calm that had never left her. and for a brief second, nothing else existed, not the vehicles, not the onlookers, not even the agents, just that shared awareness of what had happened and what it revealed. Reeves inhaled slowly, the breath measured but heavy, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the sharpness from before, only something quieter, something more honest. "I should have taken a moment," he said, the words simple, but carrying more weight than anything he had said earlier, and Naomi listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, not softened by the statement, but not hardened either, simply present, as if she understood that recognition was not something given to her, but something he had to arrive at himself. "A moment changes everything," she replied gently, her voice low, steady, not instructive, not forgiving, just true, and the words settled between them with a clarity that did not need to be explained. The second officer lowered his gaze briefly, shifting his stance again, the tension fully gone now, replaced by a quiet awareness that lingered in the background, while the teenager, near the vending machine, finally took a step back, his posture relaxing as the intensity of the moment dissolved into something he would carry with him long after he left. A faint breeze moved through once more, softer than before, brushing against the edges of the scene, carrying with it the ordinary sounds that had been waiting to return, the distant hum of traffic, the soft click of a pump resetting, the low murmur of voices beginning to rise again. But none of it erased what had been revealed, it only framed it, holding it in place like a memory already forming. Naomi opened the car door slowly, the hinge moving with a quiet, familiar sound, and before she stepped inside, she paused for just a fraction of a second, her gaze drifting once more across the space, not to linger, not to judge, but to acknowledge, and then she lowered herself into the seat with the same calm presence she had carried from the beginning, closing the door gently behind her, the soft thud final, contained, leaving the rest of them standing there, not in chaos, not in conflict, but in something far quieter, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. The engine turned over with a soft, steady hum, not loud, not abrupt, just enough to signal movement, and Naomi rested her hands lightly on the steering wheel, her fingers relaxed, her posture composed, as if nothing about the moment behind her had unsettled the rhythm she carried within. The dashboard lights glowed faintly against the dimming afternoon, reflecting softly across the windshield, while outside, the gas station returned to its ordinary shape, the lines of painted concrete, the hum of distant traffic, the quiet presence of people who had begun to move again, but not quite the same way they had before. Officer Reeves remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the vehicle, not following it with urgency, not calling out, just watching, as if the act of witnessing had become more important than anything he could say. His shoulders no longer squared, no longer held by tension, but lowered slightly, the weight of the moment settling into him in a way that would not fade quickly. The second officer shifted beside him, glancing once at Reeves, before looking away, not speaking, not needing to, because the silence between them carried more clarity than any exchange could provide. The agents began to step back toward their vehicles, their movements controlled, efficient, not hurried, not lingering, as if their role had always been temporary, precise, and now complete. And one by one, doors closed with soft, measured sounds, the engines starting in sequence, blending into the background without drawing attention, leaving behind no spectacle, only resolution. The teenager near the vending machine picked up his drink again, but did not lift it, his eyes still following Naomi's car as it idled for a brief moment longer, as if he was trying to hold on to the feeling of what he had just seen before it slipped into memory. Naomi glanced once into the rearview mirror, not to revisit the moment, not to check what remained, but simply to acknowledge that it was now behind her, her expression unchanged, calm, steady, and she eased her foot onto the accelerator, the car rolling forward smoothly, tires gliding over the pavement as she guided it toward the open road. The wind moved gently across the lot, lifting a stray piece of paper that had caught against the curb, carrying it a few feet before letting it settle again. And in that small motion, the scene seemed to exhale, releasing what had been held within it. Reeves finally turned his head slightly, his gaze lowering to the ground for a brief second before lifting again, not searching, not reacting, just present, as if something within him had shifted quietly into place, something that would not announce itself but would remain. Naomi's car reached the edge of the station and merged onto the road, the sunlight catching briefly along its surface before it blended into the flow of distant vehicles, becoming part of something larger, something continuous. And as it disappeared from view, the space it left behind did not feel empty. It felt complete, like a question that had been answered without needing to be spoken, leaving only the quiet understanding of how easily a moment can change and how deeply it can stay.